Now page 3, if we look at the top of page 3, there's some really interesting information here. Remember when we first read the first page of the loan disclosure document? It said to read this table, bring this table to the closing and compare it with what your actual closing statement is. So here we're saying, this is the table that we were talking about. This is the one that we want you to go back and compare it to. Well, the CFPB kind of figured that maybe there's going to be some people that are going to forget about it, or they're going to have lost it, or don't remember. And so they came in and reprinted all the summary that was on that first loan disclosure document. So it's right there. Then, right next to that, they have put in the final numbers so they can see exactly where that goes from one number to the other. Well, let's take a look at this and see what happens. So our cash to close, that's the biggest thing, right? Cash to close, well, we can see that in the original loan estimate, they were coming in with a little over $16,000. Now at the final, they're only coming in with $14,000. Wow, that's great, isn't it? They have $2,000 less they're having to bring into closing. That's really helpful. But let's see how that's broken down. First one we want to look at here is the loan closing cost. Oh, there's a problem right off the bat. It was originally $8,000 and now it's up to $9,700. There's $1,700 more dollars that they're bringing into the lender that wasn't originally disclosed. So how did that happen? Well, the CFPB doesn't give us the detail of this, and again, they're using this as the example to teach with, but we know that something went up. I can guarantee you that there will have been at least one and probably multiple disclosures, that loan disclosure issued again, which tells them how this got from $8,000 up to $9,700. So they knew about this long before they're sitting down at the closing table. Let's look at what else is on this form. We see there was a $29 credit. My guess is that's probably a credit that they paid for the credit report prior to closing, so they're given a credit for that. Let's see, their down payment, nope, that stayed the same. Their initial earnest money deposit, that stayed the same, still $10,000. Oh, look at this, the seller's credit. The seller came in with $2,500. How would that have happened? How did that happen? Well, you all know how that happens. There would have been a disclosure and an addendum which would have had the seller and the buyer signing that says, seller, I'm okay on the seller side for paying for $2,500 of closing costs for the buyer. But that would have all been done with disclosures and the addendum so that before closing, everybody's aware of that. And it would have prompted another set of disclosures. And look at this. Adjustments by other credits, another $1,035. Where would that have come from? My guess is, again, we don't know exactly, but my guess is that, remember we talked about the back-end money? That the lender probably is the one that came in with that money because of the way the loan was priced, either the interest rate adjustment or perhaps the adjustment on the margin. So that's pretty interesting. Now, I want to show you something else that you may or may not be comfortable with, okay? Watch this. This is still on page 3, but it's the bottom part of page 3. Anybody see any problem with that statement? Look that over pretty carefully, because what you're seeing here is the buyer's side of the transaction completely, as well as the seller's side. Are you comfortable with that? Yeah, I agree. Most of you are not going to be comfortable with that because the buyer gets to see everything that is happening on the seller side, showing that the seller's getting $64,000 out of this transaction. Now that may be uncomfortable for some of you depending on how you negotiate it. If you're the listing agent, you might have said, oh man, you know, we can't do that. We can't come down that low because my seller's already not getting anything out of it. And then you go to the closing and the buyer sees they're getting $64,000 out of that. Be careful. Be careful what you disclose and how you're using that information because they're going to see it all. Now, there's another issue that's here too which might be uncomfortable to you. Right now, you get all of the settlement statements and the closing statements, you know, coming from the title company. That's still going to happen, but not with this form. And again, this is coming out 3 days before the closing is taking place. The government regulations have determined, made a formal official determination that this violates the privacy rules if this gets into the hands of anybody other than the borrower. So you as the borrower's agent, buyer's agent, the listing agent, On the other title company, if there's two involved, they don't get this. Only the buyer gets this. But you know what? You are going to be asked to explain this and help them understand. Now, even if the borrower says, you know what, I would like my agent to have a copy of this. It's not going to happen. Can't happen. The lender cannot send it out. So you would have to go to your borrower and say, I understand that form. Can you send that to me? Email that or fax it to me or whatever, and let me help you with it, because you can't get that from the lender. Now, if you go through this form, it's going to be pretty interesting, because when you get back to the final page, you'll see that there is only a signature line on there for the buyer. There's not a signature line on there for the seller. So this is not a disbursement form. This is not a form that the title company can use that acknowledges by buyer and seller that they can disperse from, because there's no seller acknowledging this. So there's going to have to be a new form or a new set of forms created by title companies, and I suspect that there may be different title companies doing it in different ways, because there is no regulation on how that has to be disclosed. So we will see another set of information that you can get a copy of, whether you're on the buyer side or the seller side, and be able to have access to this information so that you can make sure it's right, because you are used right now as a source for verifying the accuracy of the information, and that still needs to continue. So look for that, but it is not going to come on this form here. There's some other disclosures. I won't take time to go through all of those. It's on that next page, which is kind of interesting to see what they're disclosing to them. Tell them they've got to make the payments or they might lose the property. They're talking about the escrow, that it can change because of what happens with the taxes and insurances. Same way with the escrow account, it can change. On page 5, it's showing those same numbers. The total of all payments, that's what's on the Truth in Lending statement now. Finance charge, that's the way it is now, and you can see the amount financed. They come back to the APR and they come back with that tip. So you kind of have a way to relate the whole story back together. Some more disclosures. They actually have done away with about 4 disclosures that were separate pieces of paper coming into the closing that have now been all included in this document. So that's kind of nice. Now right at the bottom in the last page, page 11, this is kind of cool. They put this here. So it's showing everybody that was involved in the whole transaction. So here's the lender. There was a mortgage broker. That's in there. We're showing the real estate broker for the buyer, real estate broker for the seller, and the title company or the settlement agent. So everybody's all right there. If they have any questions in the future, they can go right there to that page and figure out what's going on. Any questions on that? We're going to leave that. We're going to go in a different direction unless you have any other questions.